Hey guys, welcome back to the Believe, Be Real, Be Bold podcast. I'm here in my home office with Tami Kiekhaefer, and I'm so pumped to have you in because we've been back and forth, talking about such a common thread in our community, which is like fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about why and how you chose to take the path into counseling and therapy.
So I remember I was sitting in geometry class in 10th grade, and I knew I wanted to have a private practice. And I just knew I wanted to be in counseling, I wanted to help people, and I kind of stayed the course ever since. So I've worked in a juvenile hall, I've worked in inpatient hospitals, outpatient schools, employee assistance program, and then finally in 2002 I opened my doors for a private practice, and I've been doing it ever since.
And what are some common themes of like people come to you for this reason or they come to you for that reason? What are some common themes in your community?
Anxiety is a big one. Anxiety and depression tend to go hand in hand. Trauma, I work a lot with post-traumatic stress. I did a lot of work with veterans. And then couples counseling, I do quite a bit of couples counseling.
Now you're touching on a lot of key points for me personally. Trauma that led to depression and anxiety, and in my passion for life and professional and then keeping my purpose strong, I use fitness and nutrition to help battle anxiety and depression. It's kind of like my natural remedy to stay strong mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually.
I definitely agree. I think exercise is the best medicine, one of the best medicines. About 10 years ago, I guess, I became certified in yoga to be a yoga teacher. So I've always incorporated yoga aspects. And then a few years ago, I started offering yoga therapy to my clients, where they can just bring in a mat, roll it out. I'll put together a sequence for them, draw pictures, and they can take it home and keep practicing. Because I think you're right, yoga, that just body, mind, spirit, staying focused. I just believe in that so much.
Our mind-body connection, for me, was my first step towards personal growth. And I finally connected the dots with mind-body through fitness, and Olympic lifting and jiu-jitsu were two very big turning points for me in understanding how mindful I need to be while I'm exercising so that I can, one, prevent injury, two, get better at it, and three, become more confident with myself during that process.
Yeah. And you know those times when you're working so hard that your body just aches. It's hard to think about, all the stresses in your life because you're just like, oh, I can't hold this pose, or just, a little bit more weight on there, or one more rep, or whatever. And when you're in that mindset, you're right. I mean, it makes you kind of block all that out and have to focus on where you are so that you don't get hurt and just keep pushing. Yeah.
And I'm part of a jiu-jitsu community, and it's what I was looking for above and beyond my own community that I built too. And this week, coincidentally enough, we're talking about motivation and dedication. Motivation is what gets us started. Dedication is what keeps us going. And the accountability piece between, say, like my coaching relationship with my client and your relationship with your patients and your clients and your community is why people need to seek out help.
Right.
Because just doing fitness and nutrition on my own was never enough. I needed to feel more like a part of a community for accountability and that dedication to the process too.
So true. Just, you're right, getting motivated, it's so hard to get that going, and then keeping it going and having someone there that can help guide you along or encourage you or give you new ideas, that's key. Yeah.
We're coming up on like a very important time of the year. Like anxiety and depression can be heightened during the holidays.
Yes.
And seasonal affective disorder is a real thing. We can't ignore that in different parts of the country. We're really blessed in Denver. But family pressure, this system dynamic in your family can heighten all those things during the holidays. And then we have this new year, new you, new philosophy, and that's when people start reaching out to help. For me, do you see an influx in the beginning of the year too?
I do, because there's that New Year's resolution that you set, and then oftentimes I think people can set long-term goals that they think are actually short-term goals, and then they end up setting themselves up to fail, and then feel bad about it and feel anxious and just think, God, forget it, I'm never going to accomplish anything. And so, being able to set some realistic goals for yourself, short-term realistic goals, that's a big thing for me.
Absolutely. Like goal setting in a realistic manner, like SMART goals. Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely.
Yeah.
That's how I started my business with my clients. I asked them for their SMART goals, and then we put them on the timeline, which is the most important thing for personal training, so that they don't get ahead of themselves like, I thought I'd lose 10 pounds by now.
Right.
Well, timely is so important. I needed something more than just fitness and nutrition. I needed more than just jiu-jitsu. So I chosen to go back to counseling for like 20 straight months without a break. And it was the difference maker for me to go from personal growth in fitness and nutrition to then like absolute growth as an individual.
Right. I could see that. I mean, you've got to start somewhere, and sometimes it's starting from the outside in, and sometimes it's starting from the inside out. But I think from the outside in, fitness, nutrition, getting your body healthy, then all of a sudden you can focus on what do I want, and what am I looking for, and where am I going in my life?
What are the last 2 or 3 key pieces of the puzzle that a set of outside eyes like yourself can help us kind of identify and focus on in a short-term, timely manner?
I think confidence is a big one. And I think that when you don't believe in yourself, sometimes you're out there just reaching for something to make you happy. And a lot of times you're looking for those quick fix deals that tend to be more unhealthy. So I think that knowing what it is that you want, respecting yourself, having that level of confidence is huge. And anxiety and depression, those kill your confidence in a nanosecond. So I think, I've always thought if you've got high anxiety, then your confidence is low, and so pulling up your anxiety will automatically lower your confidence.
Or the other way around, lowering your anxiety will automatically pull up your confidence.
Increase your confidence.
Got
Did I say it wrong?
I don't know. I was just asking for the clarification.
So yeah, think about a situation where you're really confident and that you know what you're doing. You maybe like fitness and nutrition. You know what you're doing. You probably meal prep and plan and know what to shop for. So you don't walk into the grocery store with all this anxiety because you already know what you're doing. But if you were put into a situation that you had no idea what you were doing and said, okay, go teach these 5,000 people what to do, and you're like, I have no idea.
High anxiety, low confidence.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then that can be said for dating too.
Yes.
Like if I have low confidence, my anxiety on that first date's going to be really high.
Right.
And then we don't really show up as our best self because we know that we're better than, we know that at our true core we have something to offer.
Right. And I think that when you've got that low confidence, then you're out, I don't know, I think it's an energy thing, and you put out this energy of a low confidence kind of, I'm willing to settle, I'm willing to compromise myself, and then you tend to meet people who are also in that place, and it's a recipe for an unhealthy relationship. So I think in relationships, feeling confident and knowing what it is that you're looking for and what you deserve and your non-negotiable list, you're setting yourself up for more of a success.
I think tuning into my intuition with my non-negotiable list is really important early on, so that maybe like I don't make bad choices and date somebody longer term because I just didn't listen to my intuition.
Oh yeah, listening to your intuition, and we all have it. I mean, some people think, I don't ever get that sixth sense or whatever. I think we all have it if you stop and pay attention and just sit and listen. And yeah, it's there. It's screaming at you.
Sure. It comes back to that mindfulness and mind-body connection that I found first in fitness and jiu-jitsu. That helped me understand what my body was trying to tell me. So from an intuitive place, it actually came from 20 years worth of fitness and nutrition. And then I'm like, well, I'm not getting as far along as I want to. What else can I learn about myself in order to really bust through that glass ceiling? I could see the future. I could see the greatness above me and out there on the horizon, but I could not break through.
I think as far as relationships, maybe it's going back through and analyzing your past relationships and understanding what mistakes were out there. And I think it's real easy to say, blame the other person. Well, he was this and she was that, but when you stop and take a look at what your part was, because it takes two people to make a relationship work, and it takes two people to make a relationship not work. And I think it's real easy to point the finger, but when you turn it around, I mean, that's where your learning point is going to be, to stop and say, all right, as difficult as it is, here's what I did, and here's what I need to change. But I think that can be definitely a learning process.
That is, in a nutshell, why I started the podcast.
Okay.
Is because I was starting to see repeated patterns between two long-term relationships and then a couple of short-term relationships that were like 2 months or less. And I saw those patterns arise, and I'm like, I'm not a trained counselor, I'm not a therapist, I'm really becoming more mindful about who I am and where I'm at in my space that I occupy, but I don't have the technical resources or the education in order to think like that for myself.
Yeah.
I could do it really surface level. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I came on too strong. Well, that's a really vague explanation for what I'm like when I first start dating. Well, okay, found the Enneagram, understand that I'm pretty intense and I can come across that way.
Okay.
Okay, well, what do I need to do in order to soften myself? Not other person's perspective of me, but how do I really approach my dating life in a softer, less intense way so that I don't come on too strong?
So I think that's, again, being aware of your audience, getting out there. It's probably when you go in to do your personal training, you automatically, I think, what's that statistic? I think someone within like the first 30 seconds or something, you can kind of, you can read them pretty well. And so, you're reading your audience, and you can see, like, if I'm coming across too intense, they might have some
that body language that kind of lean back.
They're kind of back up, or look around, or get fidgety, and so I think, learning to get outside of yourself, to pay attention to what's going on around you is huge, but then maybe that feeds into the anxiety too, because if you're anxious going into it, then you're not really aware of your surroundings. You're just like, what if this happens? And you get too nervous to where you can't really stop and think ahead.
And let's say that, like, I've taken care of this appearance of coming on too strong. I've understood where that comes from. I've kind of like not washed my hands of it, because it can come and go over time depending on the reflection of the person across the table from us, right? Because it takes two to make a relationship not work and to work. So let's say I'm becoming more confident about my dating life, and I get 3 to 4 weeks in, 6 weeks in. There's no timeline here that's really hard and fast. And then we come up on this moment of like, I'm afraid of rejection, so I'm not going to ask, are you seeing anybody else? Are we in a relationship? Is this a situationship? Are we friends with benefits? Like, it comes down to like defining a relationship and fear of rejection at the same time.
Yeah, that's such a scary place for people, because I think that, and I kind of have a 6-month rule. So I think that within 6 months, I can always tell when people are in at the 6-month mark, because the little things that were kind of cute or even got under your skin are like, oh, this is a little irritating, or it's your first first conflict that you might have. And so that 6-month mark is interesting for me, but I think even to back it up a little bit to even defining what is our relationship, you're right, that does take a lot of confidence, because now you're becoming more vulnerable and you're really putting yourself out there and taking a risk, and it's scary because nobody wants to be rejected, nobody wants to get hurt. And so it's that first part of the relationship that everyone's on their best behavior, and everything, your priorities are exactly the same, and it's scary to wonder, oh, I kind of like this, I don't want to lose it. And if you start feeling like I don't want to lose it, you become more protective of it, and so that's all kinds of things can come from that.
And why I ask is because at that moment, or right around that same time frame, is like, no, I don't want to lose what we have. I'm not exactly sure where the other person is. Are we on the same page at all? Because we really, truly don't know each other. We can have feelings for each other, but maybe we're not communicating that very well, which is why communication is everyone's answer to like the thing that matters most in a relationship. but we're not good at it inherently. And that's what I need to learn is how do I communicate my needs for security in a relationship by defining a relationship. So we come up to that conversation and we're kind of walking on eggshells around each other a little bit, like tiptoeing around the issue. Maybe somebody's hinting or speaking in code a little bit.
Kind of passively.
Hinting at the time where we're like, I think we need to have this conversation. And that's why communication is the foundation of a healthy relationship. So how do we go from, which I've learned, tiptoeing and walking on eggshells is like the detriment to a relationship from a man's position or the masculine energy in a relationship. We need to take leadership. Now, if we're leading our partner to that conversation, how do we do it and face our fear of rejection?
I wonder if I think that there's a big confidence piece in that, obviously, that's what we're talking about. And I don't know, I think that there's a part where you have to take that risk. And maybe you ask questions as far as, what are you looking for? Where do you think this is going? I really enjoy our time together. I really like to spend more time together. And I guess kind of putting questions out there and seeing how the other person is starting to respond to it. And then at some point you just have to go for it. You just have to say, hey, I really like you and I want to be exclusive. What do you think? Or so I think that being direct I believe being direct is your best bet, because if you're beating around the bush, if you're dropping little hints, the communication is so tough anyway, and the chances of us miscommunicating and missing each other are so incredibly high. And so if you can, the more you can eliminate that gray area and just the wondering and the making assumptions, I think the better. And it's gonna stand for a more honest relationship too.
So what I'm hearing you say is take a moment of validating the relationship. Hey, I really like the time that we spend together. I like you as a person. What are your thoughts on being exclusive, defining a relationship? Are you seeing other people?
Yeah.
Do you want to see other people?
Yeah. Just kind of, doing your investigation. I often talk to my clients about using it as a science experiment, and so you're collecting your data, and before you really jump in, so you're collecting your data. And I think part of it too is, I'm a big proponent in taking it slowly. I think that there's so many people who just want to jump in and they go with that, in that gut feeling of the initial gut feeling, not the real gut feeling. The gut feeling
where hormones come into play a lot more than
right.
actual intuition and mindfulness.
Yeah, and you create this relationships, then you jump in, but when taking it slowly, I think it gives you an opportunity to see that person in different settings. Maybe you see them with their friends, you see them with their family, you see them out, you see them when they're in a conflict. You're slowly getting to know that person. And so then by the time that you're ready to take that risk, you've seen them, how they operate. So you do get to know them on different layers without actually asking them, what do you think of your family? Because I think that's the answer. Oh, they're fine, And then, okay, what does that mean? What kind of relationship do you have? And how did you work through if it wasn't a great relationship? Things like that.
And then we come up on, even asking this question of, do you want to be exclusive? Are you seeing other people? Takes a lot of vulnerability.
Yes.
And when people say, well, I don't want to ruin what we have because it's really great, you can start the conversation by saying that. I really love what we have. I think it's really great. My vulnerable opportunity is to say, I would like to see a little bit more. I would like to see how far we can take this, or to see if we're on the same page or not. And the vulnerability for me is very hard.
Scary.
It's very challenging.
Yeah. And I think when you ask that question, sometimes it can even change the dynamic of a relationship. So now that it's out there, you can't take that back. It's already there. And now there's some of those feelings that people can throw up as far as getting a little defensive. And because it's easier to be defended than it is to have that vulnerability. And so sometimes that's where you notice it. And that's where, if the dynamic changes, that's another layer to step back and say, okay, let's see what we can do to work through it. doesn't mean the relationship is over or doomed. It just means that it gives you an opportunity to step back and really kind of evaluate it and use all the communication tools to say, what's going on? What just now happened? I sense, something's up. So.
Because timing is so critical.
It is.
Yeah. Two people can be perfect for each other, but if the timing's not right, then unfortunately we have to table it for a little while and come back later.
Yeah.
As a possibility. Or like there is a lot of transplant population in Denver.
Yes.
Like they came here for a reason, whether it was to find a better life, to make a career move. I meet a lot of people all the time who are just like, you know what? I was stuck where I was at, and I figured a beautiful place like Denver, a lot of sunshine, less seasonal affective disorder than the Midwest, and maybe that's not the right timing for them either because they're reestablishing themselves in a new place.
Right. Yeah. Just getting to know, who am I in Denver and what do everything that Denver and Colorado has to offer, and kind of getting your bearings in a new job, a new location, new friends. Yeah.
And this moment of facing rejection and vulnerability can do two things for us. One, it can change the dynamic of the relationship like you were talking about. Or two, it can really put a decision on the person who is unsure. And here's what that's going to solve for us. If we're sure, if we're confident in our position, we've done a lot of personal work while we were single, a lot of personal growth, which is where I'm coming from, and I'll say that admittedly.
Me too.
I'm asking this question from my perspective, right? If I were to have this very fear-inducing conversation where rejection and vulnerability come into play, if the person that I'm seeing is not on the same page, what it's going to do is it's going to save me time.
Absolutely.
And it's going to maybe possibly save me heartache too, where we get to that 6-month mark and we have our first big conflict and the other person's not willing to work through it because we never had the are we on the same page conversation. They're just bouncing at that moment because they're like, oh, well, I was never really invested anyways. We never talked about it.
Yeah.
It's like their scapegoat or their loophole.
And you can't change other people.
No, you can't want it for them.
You cannot change other people, right. And so sometimes I look at it as, if you put it out there and it's not received very well, or it's not, or it's received with their own defensiveness or their own fears, I think definitely being able to talk through that a little bit, but also being able to know that this person's being honest with me. So almost like, thank you for telling me where you are because now I get to decide if that works for me. And so it's not where there has to be anger and, all those other negative defensive mechanisms that we throw up. It's like, thanks for being honest because now I get to decide for myself if this works. And if it doesn't, then we had a great time and it was nice knowing you and I'm moving on.
And what that does for the person who took the risk and that fear of rejection and vulnerability is they're like, well, now I don't have to carry it with me for so much longer than, say, like I did when I was younger. Breakups are hard at any age, but if we come at it from that perspective that you were just talking about, of I'm putting myself out there, then the other person can decide, then I've done everything that I possibly could in that relationship, and I can move forward with my own life quickly if it doesn't come to the conclusion that you wanted or had hoped for.
And I think that's a great point, just knowing if you can sit back and say, I've done everything I possibly could for this relationship. When I'm working with couples who are thinking of ending a relationship or getting divorced, I think the worst thing would be is to make that decision and then look back and say, I wish we would have tried this, or I wish we would have talked about, or I wish I would have been more direct in my communication, and then the other person's not available anymore. I think that's the worst case scenario.
What if?
Yeah. And then not being able to do anything about it. So I think you're right, like knowing I've done everything that I could do to make this thing work, and it just didn't work.
And then we can process it at our own pace, and then we can learn to let go of the things that a lot of people hold on to. And let's pick up on that non-negotiable list.
Okay.
Where when we were talking before we got started, we talked about it's a values-based list. And then from our education and what we've learned through the podcast is that setting your intentions before you begin a date is so important.
Yes.
And in combination with this non-negotiables list too.
I do. I think, and part of what I do in the program that I'm working on is helping people go back and look at a timeline of their relationships. And I think sometimes you don't know exactly what it is that you want, but being able to know what you don't want can help. And evaluating your past relationships, I think it helps you say, you know, I loved this, but I did not like that, and I'm not willing to, you know. So I think that you're right. Key is coming up with that before you meet someone. Because you can meet someone, it's like, whoa, they're so hot. Forget it.
Sparks, yeah.
Forget it that they whatever. You know?
Uh-huh.
And so then your non-negotiable list just goes away, and then you go back to compromising yourself, and then there goes your confidence, and it's going to turn into resentment.
It will.
Point.
And then it'll be tumultuous, and then it'll become not your ideal relationship, which is what our authentic community is looking for.
And nobody's perfect out there. So you've got your non-negotiables, the absolute deal breakers, and then you've got your negotiables. And you have to decide what goes on what side. And
I have some preferences too when I go into a meeting with somebody new or a date with somebody new. And I'm like, oh, I would prefer this, but it's not on my non-negotiable list. So can we work through it with proper communication over time?
Exactly.
That's what we're here to learn. Is like, can these two individuals come together and build a life together while maintaining their own individuality the whole time, and work through these preferences. And our foundation of that work comes from our values. And if we share core values, then we can move that progression so much further together. Because people can change. They have to want to change. So if you go into it with your value system, and it's also their value system, but maybe one of you is kind of off course from that, it just is a matter of that person wanting to get back on course. But if you already share that foundation, your chances are a lot better. Oh, I love that. We're talking about this straying off course, and then one person is like, kind of a foundation piece in the relationship for a little while. If somebody's maybe unemployed for a short period of time, they lose their confidence. There has to be a lot of compromising in that long-term relationship, but also compromising in the initial part too. Right. And when we do, I think you said this just a moment ago, when we do compromise our values, we lose our confidence. And then the resentment builds. Yes. And those are compromising your core values. Yeah. You're right. I think, you know, things happen in people's lives. If it's you know, you get laid off, or you've got a medical issue, or family stuff happens, or just whatever, you know, I think that's where compromise has to happen. Like, you know, I care about you enough that we're going to get through this thing together, versus you're unwilling to stop, I don't know, using cocaine or drinking or whatever. And on our non-negotiable list. Yeah, that's not going to work for me, because now I'm no longer in a relationship with you. You're in a relationship with your addiction, and I don't have a place in this relationship anymore. Yeah, but there is hope in that particular situation. If the person wants. That's correct. And I went to an event last week that was Sober Curious. There was a panelist who is still married after recovering from 20 years of alcoholism. Yeah. And there is hope for people like that. As long as we have those core values, there is some self-awareness, because if you're still lying to yourself, you're not going to get past pretty much anything. Yeah. And I think that when you know, there's going to be times when people are going through those changes where one person is working harder for the relationship than the other person, but I think when you can see that they do recognize it's an issue, and they have some type of willingness to take some first steps, and, you know, as long as they're working, then, you know, that's when you evaluate, like, this relationship is worth it to me. I'm in it. We've got this. Because both parties are working. Yeah. Key point there. Yeah. And like, when we approach an opportunity for growth, like, we're in this together, my partner says to me, Dave, I'm seeing some patterns recently. You're busying yourself with so much outside of the home, outside of work. Are you trying to avoid something? And I get defensive in that moment, because that's what? Oh no, that's not me at all. I'm just really enjoying all my activities at this time. And I set that up to give you a softball question. How is defensiveness like an ice cream cone? So we have the ice cream cone shape.
So I look at it as on the top part, you've got all of the externally expressed behaviors and we just focus on more of the negative ones right now. So if you think at the top of the ice cream cone, you've got anger, sarcasm can be a defense mechanism, being judgmental, being jealous, being even the cold shoulder, being passive aggressive, that's another one. I mean, if you think about it, those are all externally expressed behaviors, and it's going to keep your guard up, like your claws are out. And when we can kind of poke holes in that defensive behavior, what you're going to find is a lot of the vulnerability part, and we all have insecurities. So now in the cone shape of the ice cream, there's your insecurities, and you might have a lot of anxiety, of depression, shame, guilt, and I think at the bottom of the ice cream cone is fear, and fear of rejection, fear of abandonment. Those are huge, and those go way back into when we were little. And so over time, I think that, I mean, you can look at how fear drives all of those negatively expressed behaviors.
So we're going to put up that infographic on Instagram this week and Facebook and things like that, so people can see it, because I love the analogy so much.
It's a powerful one, and I think that people get stuck on those externally expressed behaviors, and then, you know, if you were going to get angry with me, well, then I'm going to say, well, I'm going to get angry back at you, and then all of a sudden we're escalating, and we totally forgot what we were even talking about.
Yeah, oftentimes we're not fighting about the root issue, which comes back to our core values a lot of the time.
And now we're reacting, and we're keeping ourselves safe because those defensive things are guarded behaviors, and underneath there are all the vulnerable ones.
And I can speak from my experience of why I guarded in relationships from an experience of trauma in young adulthood.
Okay.
And that's something that you work with specifically. So besides these defense mechanisms, or this distancing technique of defensiveness and sarcasm and passive aggressiveness and things like that, how else does trauma from our childhood, in maybe 5 or 6 minutes, how does that impact our adult relationships?
I think you know, people can go, I guess, one of 3 ways. There's probably more, but you can become defensive, or you can do the flip side where you're a caretaker and you're a fixer, and so you want to go in and almost fix the other person because that in some way makes you feel like you have a sense of control. But if you're always the fixer, then you're not paying attention to your own needs. And then I guess the third way would be to work through your own trauma and understand where you're coming from and be able to set some really good boundaries and assert yourself in relationships. If that answers.
Yeah, of course. I think that's really heavy.
It is heavy.
And I know that our audience can relate to that because like attracts like. Yeah. And if I have an experience of trauma throughout my young adulthood, then the people that I speak to and that my message resonates with, they're going to be attracted to that too. So we want to be a resource for people to address their childhood trauma, which is why I'm glad you said it in that way, because that's what the podcast is for.
Okay.
Is to provide resources for our audience who experience any number of things to like pick out their favorite expert guest and reach out for help.
Okay.
And it's happened before, and I love that.
That's great. And you know, and I think I did a lot of work. I worked with domestic violence clients, perpetrators. I had groups for about 5 years, and looking at the cycle of violence kind of thing. Even if you had a lot of trauma in your early adult years, and then maybe you were the victim in that situation, you might have not worked through that, and what you know to be comfortable might not be healthy. So then you jump right back into another relationship that's going to have those same aggressive behaviors, and it's kind of like, okay, now I know my role, so I'm more comfortable. And so, yeah, I think that working through that trauma is really important, just to set yourself up and become available enough for a healthy relationship.
So well said, because I think that in a compassionate way can help so many people.
Right. And it's not a class that we had in high school. It's like, get out there, you know, good luck to you. And we all have to learn the hard way.
Shove off. You're an adult now.
Yeah.
So if your message resonates with somebody, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you, and what do you have coming up in the near future that they can get involved with?
So the best way to get a hold of me is probably just call me up or text me. My phone number, do you want me to do all that?
Yeah, go right ahead.
It's 720-488-6288, and my website is, or my email is Tami@healthyhealing.net.
That's with an I, Tami.
Tami, yeah. And my my Facebook page I've got is Tami. Well, it's Tami Kiekhaefer, LCSW. You can look it up on your stuff because my name is long. But I do have a group called Relationship Toolkit: Finding True Love, Not Regrets. And when I started it, I think some people thought it was a dating site. It's not a dating site. It's to help people learn how to have a healthy relationship. And it is a free Facebook group, and I've got articles, I've got some videos up there, I'm trying to work towards building a community, because I think having that trusting, safe community gives people a platform to learn and grow.
Absolutely. We are all in.
Yeah. And then I'm shooting for January, but Preparing for the Jungle is going to be a 6-week course. And it's set up to look at past behaviors and experiences, looking at where you are now, and then kind of casting the net going forward. But it's preparing for the jungle, and that's going to be helping people go through a lot of what we're talking about and more with the work that goes along with it.
Yeah, it's pretty savage out there nowadays.
Yeah, it is.
And if you want to, in the next couple of minutes, if you want to leave us with one key point that maybe we touched on briefly or we didn't get to, what would that be?
I think self-respect, having confidence, just being able to slow things down and take a step back to just give yourself that time. You're worth it, and knowing what it is that you deserve, and don't settle. Don't settle. It's not worth it.
Yeah, we'll be happier in the long run if we don't settle.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so very much.
You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you for having me on
It's
here.
my pleasure.
Yeah.
What do you say in the next 6 to 12 months we catch up and see how far we've come, and how braving the jungle, preparing for the jungle has done wonders for your community.
That sounds great.
Well, thanks, Tami.
Okay, thank you.